Todos deberían hablar de esto. Y nadie habla de esto hasta que te toca por obligación.
Que no nos importa. El descuento hiperbólico. Nuestro yo del futuro no existe.
Triste, pero real. Pero es parte de lo que queremos cambiar. Y ojalá que este capítulo con... No sé si será la persona que sabe más de retiro en el mundo, pero... Si no pegan el palo, yo creo.
Cerca. Hoy día nuestra invitada es Christine Benz. Christine es directora de finanzas personales y de retiro en Morningstar, al igual que nuestro otro gran invitado y mentor a esta altura, Tom Itzorek. Y Christine también es host del podcast The Long View de Morningstar y sacó un libro que se llama How to Retire o Cómo jubilarse. Creo que junto a todas las cosas que nos interesan, logramos traerla al podcast y tenemos una tremenda entrevista para ustedes.
Además que como todas estas personas brillantes, pero con ganas de contribuir, no habla creo que desde el ego, súper cercana, se nota que realmente quiere ayudar desde esta tremenda empresa que es Morningstar, que probablemente muchos animales no la conocen, pero cuando tú trabajas en el mundo de inversiones, es gigantesca, es un referente, hacen ranqueos de fondos para realmente ver quién lo hace bien, quién lo hace mal, y realmente es lo que se mira, y después generan research, generan mucha investigación, tienen un robo-advisor gigantesco como el que veíamos con Thomas Itzorek. Lo hacen todo bien, Pablito, y creo que es un orgullo, un placer, una bendición que esta gente esté queriendo venir al podcast a hablar con nosotros, que creo que enganchamos también por las ganas de contribuir.
Yo a Christine la sigo hace mucho tiempo, tiene un newsletter o unas columnas que escribe, que siempre que aparecía una recomendada por otro lado la leía y era, oh, qué bien escribe, qué fácil, hace ver todo muy simple, que es, creo, de la característica de un buen escritor. Y después sacó el libro. En un principio no le di mucha bola porque estoy muy lejos de retirarme. Después lo pensé para mis papás, lo leí, lo devoré. Es muy bueno el libro porque son entrevistas a otros grandes referentes de este mundo del retirement planning. Entonces me llevé muchos ejemplos y personas que investigar. Y se los dejé a mis papás, obviamente. Y la semana pasada, de hecho, mi mamá me escribió, oye, empecé el libro que me dejaste, Christine, súper buena, no sé qué. Así que ahora le voy a decir, mira mamá, la entrevistamos.
Creo que uno de los grandes aprendizajes de aprender de retiro ha sido que la parte financiera, la parte de inversiones, es importante, pero es un check. Y todo lo que está alrededor, todo lo aparte de relaciones humanas, todo lo que necesita nuestro cerebro para poder vivir, ser feliz, estar tranquilo y enfrentar estas etapas distintas, a veces difíciles de la vida, es lo que realmente importa. Que es lo mismo que vemos cuando hablamos de planificación. Ok, armemos un buen asset allocation, definamos bien tu riesgo, pero ¿para qué? Para la vida que realmente quieres vivir. Y esas preguntas son muy difíciles de hacérselas solo, y ahí es cuando realmente un tercero, un coach financiero, o como uno le quiera decir, te puede agregar muchísimo valor. Así que tremendos temas para seguir entendiendo, perfeccionándonos y empapándonos de este gran concepto del life planning que hemos ido metiendo en nuestra cabeza, en nuestro capital humano, con el que queremos ayudar a la comunidad.
Sí, en mis planificaciones he tenido cada vez más componentes de retirement planning y todos llegan con la misma pregunta. ¿Me puedo jubilar o no? Que creo que es una pregunta muy válida y es la primera que quiero responder. Sí, con este estilo de vida, no, aguantemos un par de años, me quiero jubilar temprano, me quiero jubilar después. ¿Qué hacer? Como todas las decisiones tácticas. Pero la mitad de las conversaciones, como dices tú, se van a, ok, ¿qué quieres hacer cuando te jubiles? ¿Quieres seguir trabajando un poco? ¿Quieres retribuir a tu comunidad? Muchos mencionan viajar o pasar tiempo con la familia, con los nietos, con los hijos. Ok, tenemos un tercio de tu tiempo listo. ¿Qué vamos a hacer con los otros 2 tercios? ¿Vas a levantarte y vas a no hacer nada durante el día? Y ahí es donde se pone más complicado y donde hay que trabajar más y conversar más y donde se hace también mucho más entretenido tener este tipo de conversaciones. Y uno a veces ve cómo se prende esa ampolleta de sí, tengo que pensar qué hacer. Uno muchas veces piensa que la vida se acaba cuando uno se jubila y listo, ahora es vacaciones eternas. Pero no, porque el ser humano no está contento si es que está echado sin hacer nada. Tenemos que encontrar algún sentido de propósito y Creo que son cosas de las que hablamos con Christine y que vamos a seguir explorando por un buen rato.
Ahí es donde vienen las grandes sorpresas. Vienen buscando un portafolio para invertir y se van con grandes preguntas de su vida en la cabeza para poder tomar los riesgos que uno necesite de acuerdo a cómo va a generar ingresos y también los objetivos que uno quiera realmente cumplir. Pero dijimos, esto es lo que todos deberían estar hablando y muy poca gente habla, y por eso nos tienen que obligar. Y uno de los que nos obliga bien es AFP Cuprum, que como el mundo, el sistema, sabe que si fuese voluntario solamente ahorrar, nos tienen que obligar desde nuestro sueldo. Y en todo este mundo obligatorio, AFP Cuprum ha jugado un tremendo rol en Chile, no solamente con fondos que han hecho crecer el dinero de los chilenos para mejorar las pensiones, sino que también a través de todo el foco que le han dado a la educación durante el último tiempo. No solamente lo generan ellos, también apoyan a los que los generan como nosotros y piensan en el largo plazo. Así que si los quieren conocer más, vayan a cuprum.cl y no solo descubran la parte obligatoria, sino también la parte voluntaria con su APB, la cuenta 2 y todo lo que ellos les puedan ofrecer.
Para que puedan retirarse bien. How to retire. Y hablaste de educación. ¿Cómo no vamos a hablar de educación con nuestro gran auspiciador, la Universidad Autónoma? Hablamos mucho de capital humano, hablamos de aprender. Si es que nos escuchas, si es que escuchas esta parte del podcast, sabes lo importante que es para nosotros educarnos. Nos vamos a seguir educando probablemente por siempre, aunque Cristóbal Grifero nos haya dicho que no está seguro si van a haber universidades, sí va a haber alguna forma de educarse, porque eso creo que nunca va a terminar en el mundo del ser humano. Pero sí hay que adaptarse, y eso es lo que ha hecho por lo menos la Universidad Autónoma. Además de las carreras tradicionales, hay carreras online para que sea más fácil, para que sea más ajustable a tu estilo de vida, y puedes averiguar de esto y mucho más en admisión.uautonoma.cl.
Nos vamos.
Y ahora sí, nos vamos.
Bienvenidos.
Animales.
Animales.
Christine, welcome to our show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are huge fans. You work at one of the companies that I think we respect the most. That's Morningstar. You also are the hostess of a very good podcast, The Long View. You published a book that I would show here, but I liked it so much that I gave it to my parents. But we want to know, how has your journey been? Like, how did you reach the point that you are at now? For the people that don't know you as good as we do.
Well, thank you. I started as part of what's now called Morningstar's manager research team. So I was a mutual fund analyst researching mutual funds and speaking with the manager and sort of assessing whether they were worthy of investors' dollars. And so that was my core job for several years, and then eventually headed up our U.S. team of fund researchers. But along the way, I realized that in that job, there were a lot of aspects of investors' plans that we weren't really speaking to. So we weren't talking about having a sane savings rate. We weren't talking about setting goals and quantifying goals and prioritizing goals. We weren't talking about asset allocation. And so I went through the Certified Financial Planner program here in the US. It's sort of I think the standard for financial planners, and got a good download of education about financial planning writ large, and began working more on financial planning matters for Morningstar. And that's really where I am today, where I write articles, do videos, speak to groups of investors about how to improve their finances. And my role is really pretty educational. In fact, I've sometimes taken these, career mapping quizzes where they ask you a ton of questions about the things that you like to do and the things that give you meaning. And I'm usually mapped into the teacher role. And I realize that my role through my work is really pretty educational. I feel like I'm a teacher, financial coach, and I like that I'm objective. So I'm not selling any particular service or product, certainly. I'm just able to be helpful, which is a really happy place to be.
Can we go maybe more backwards? I really love the question that you asked Ben Felix, and he started to tell like I was an engineer, and I don't know. Then I end speaking about money. But when did you realize that speaking about money, speaking about personal finance was important, and that you could make an impact in society uh, speaking about these things?
It's such a good question. And I will say, I went through school as a little bit of a hippie do-gooder. I studied Russian language and political science in college. I think I had some vague notion of contributing to world peace. And I really had finances quite marginalized in my mind. I did not think it was something that I cared a lot about. But what I've come to realize in my journey is just how important our financial wherewithal is to everything that we're able to achieve in our lives, for better, for worse. So people's level of financial well-being is inextricably connected to their physical well-being, to their emotional well-being. And so I think recognizing that made me a lot more comfortable putting my efforts behind this area. And now I realize how intertwined it is. In fact, my favorite thing when I get feedback from readers is, when they say that something I've written or something I've worked on has given them peace of mind. I love to hear that the work that I've done has contributed to someone's well-being, which is what it's all about.
It's so satisfying. And your book is called How to Retire, and there are many issues in the financial literacy world: human capital, saving, investing. Why choose retirement?
Well, the more I've worked on retirement planning, it's just a really interesting area. In fact, someone, maybe it was Bill Sharp, I think, called it the hardest problem in all of finance, figuring out how to invest for someone's retirement when the time horizon is uncertain, certainly market performance over that time horizon is uncertain, and the inflation rate is uncertain. So you're trying to get your arms around a lot of variables that are impossible to forecast in advance. But there's just so much to dive into in the realm of retirement planning, and people really need the help. Financial advisors need the help about how to help clients with retirement planning and retirement decumulation, how to spend from their portfolios. So I just find it to be an endlessly fascinating subject, and some of the most robust and interesting research happening in the financial planning space has centered around the retirement decumulation problem. So there's always something new. It has a lot of different tentacles that venture into areas like housing and health, in addition to the financial aspects. So I just find it a super interesting area, and I feel like I'm always learning.
For me, it's like retirement should be like the only main topic, because uh, to retire well, you have to start really early. You have to know how to make a portfolio, how to invest, how to spend less that you earn. At 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 which point do you think, I don't know, American people start to worry about retirement?
Probably not until they're in their 50s. They've, I'm sure, heard a lot about why they should care about retirement, but there's been some really interesting academic research from Hal Hirschfield at UCLA, is the notable person. People really struggle to empathize with their future selves. That you think about, yourself as an older person, and you just don't identify with that person in any way. Telling a 30-year-old to care about their 65-year-old self, it just doesn't resonate. Which is one reason I've actually become a huge believer in the idea of helping younger investors score wins earlier, whether it is to purchase a home or to pay off student loans or whatever the case might be, to help get them on board with the idea of long-term savings. There needs to be some shorter-term benefit. So I think that that's a concept that we need to be talking about, that telling your 30-year-old self to save for your 65-year-old self, it's probably not going to work. But telling your 30-year-old self to put some money aside because in 2 years you can do X, that's the thing that I think will maybe light a fire under people. It can all be about retirement planning, certainly for people who are, say, under age 50.
I think maybe that's why the concept of FU money from J.L. Collins that was in your book, and we're actually reading the book for the podcast, resonates because it's more short term. It gives you a goal and what to work towards. Because I feel I'm 31. Francisco's a bit older. And of course, my 65-year-old self, if I don't care too much. I know because I work in the industry and everything, but subjectively, I feel like, I'm going to earn more money later. I'm going to be able to solve that problem later. And at the same time, I should be starting now.
Exactly. And I have to say, I love JL's work. And I love the FI community, the financial independence community, which I think is really a global movement at this point. But the basic idea is that you aren't going to depend on a paycheck forever. And some of these folks separate from work at quite young ages. But I love that idea of targeting financial independence. I feel like it's an incredibly powerful movement, and I'm glad to see it gaining strength. I worry a little bit that maybe there's a little bit of a bull market phenomenon because stocks, generally speaking, have been quite strong for a long period of time. But overall, I think it's a very, very healthy movement where you're encouraging people to set decent savings rates, and the net goal is to put themselves in the driver's seat of their lives so they're not beholden to an employer and a paycheck forever.
Let's go for a short-term goal, which should be a good saving rate in order to live properly and have a good retirement. Because I think
go ahead.
we must try to do this simple, because if not, you paralyze and you don't do anything.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I always say 10% is a good baseline savings rate if you're trying to set a target. And then higher income people should reach for an even higher level of savings, obviously, because they will have more discretionary cash flow. So I would say for higher income people, if you can reach for 20%, even 25%, then you can put yourself in a position to hit financial independence earlier and certainly set your retirement plan up for success as well.
It's tough making the comparison because you have Social Security in the US, and in Chile, the pensions will not be as good. So maybe we should aim for even more than that 10%. But even getting that 10% is super hard. So it's a tough problem. Maybe the toughest, as you mentioned. And with the financial independence community, one thing that always gets me is once you reach your number, you're okay. And that number is take the 4% of your portfolio, which I think comes from the Bengen, the Trinity study. And
yes,
if you could explain a bit more why that may not be the case, or why that 4% works or doesn't work.
Yeah. So William Bengen was a financial planner who set out to research how much someone could reasonably take as a starting withdrawal percentage from a portfolio, and then just inflation adjust that dollar amount thereafter through retirement. His goal was, even if you hit the worst case scenario for market performance, what would have been the most that you could have taken out in a very bad market environment? And so he hit on this 4% guideline, sometimes called the 4% rule, which I think is, to his chagrin, he doesn't like hearing it called a rule. But the idea was that if you happen to have retired in the worst market environment in the US, and I should also point out that his research focuses on US stock and bond returns, he homed in on kind of the mid to late 1960s as the worst period in modern market history that you could have retired into. And he found that if you took that 4% initial withdrawals, so let's say 40,000 on a 1 million portfolio, that you could then give yourself a little raise to account for inflation, but you would not have run out of money over a 30-year time horizon. So that's Bengen's baseline research. It's been stress tested. Many other people have looked at it. We do kind of similar research at Morningstar where we take a forward-looking view of what we expect asset class returns to be. We have called for actually a little bit more caution for U.S. investors because of fairly high equity valuations in the U.S. and what were until recently fairly low expected fixed income returns. But in relation to fire, my concern is when I hear people who have like 40-year retirements or 50-year retirements, if they're taking 4%, the research has not been conducted over such a long drawdown period. And so I would say you'd want to be a little bit more cautious than 4%, or you'd want to be quite prepared to course correct as the years unfold in your retirement. So if you encounter a bad market environment, maybe you started with 4%, but in year 2 or 3, the market is terrible, stocks have big losses, you need to be prepared to rein in that spending. And my sense is that with a lot of people in the FI community, they are very used to adjusting their expenses. They're comfortable reining in their spending if they need to. So that gives me some comfort. But the key point is that the 4% guideline has not been stress tested over such a long period. And for people who are planning a very long drawdown period, they need to be more conservative and or flexible. And I would also point people to Karsten Yeski's work in this area. I would say that he has been the most serious researcher in the realm of safe withdrawal rates for FI people, and he is an FI person himself. So I think his website is called Early Retirement Now. It's a great resource with lots of in-depth research.
Amazing. One really tough question for me is, which is the role of your home in that retirement? Because I think that it will be the biggest asset that you can have, because real estate is very expensive. My position is that you should sell your house and you should spend that money in your retirement. What is your position about that?
Yeah, it's such an important point. Home equity, the fact that people have a lot of wealth tied up in their homes is quite suboptimal from a retirement planning standpoint, in that you have people who have a lot of housing wealth and not a lot of liquid investment wealth. So the remedy that you suggest, this idea of liquefying the home, moving to a smaller place, that is a super sensible idea. The problem is that as we age, oftentimes people do get a little bit complacent. They like where they live, their friends are where they live, their stuff is where they live, and actually enacting that move, that relocation can be tricky. So that's a practical impediment. But certainly for people who have a lot of housing wealth and have not enough to live on in their investment portfolio, it's a wonderful strategy to consider. I was speaking earlier this year to a group of older adults in San Diego in the U.S., which is a very expensive part of our country. And I asked, who here has most of their wealth tied up in their home? And I think every hand shot up in the room, that people are really struggling with this, but they also want to live in San Diego, which is a really lovely and expensive place to live. So oftentimes people have trouble downsizing. They might, want to move to a more sort of aging friendly place, but it's sort of a lateral move in terms of the financial aspect of it.
Yeah, everyone wants to move to California to retire, but it's so expensive. It was super interesting what you mentioned about let's think about all the numbers, but when you make the decision, you're thinking about your friends and where you live. So we'll go there to the non-financial aspect. But before, one of the most important financial points in retirement is the sequence of return risk. And I hadn't thought too much about it until I read your book. And it's super interesting. How could you explain for someone that hasn't heard about the term?
It's one of the most important risk factors for retirement and for whether a portfolio will last over someone's specific retirement drawdown period. And the basic idea is that if you encounter a bad market right at the outset of your portfolio and you don't take steps to rein in your spending during that period, that you have a higher risk of running out over whatever your retirement time horizon is. If you're overspending from a portfolio that has simultaneously dwindled, that leaves less in place to recover and repair itself when the market eventually does. So that is the big risk factor that when we talk about building retirement portfolios that are durable, we are trying to ward against that risk factor. So we do that by building in safer assets into the plan, so that if that bad, usually equity market shows up early in your retirement, you could spend from those safer assets, leave your equity assets in place to recover, and that way you're not overspending from a portfolio that has declined. So you're building in safer assets, and you're also reining in your spending a little bit if you possibly can in such an environment.
I know that we're not making promises here, but what are your beliefs about equity in the long run? Maybe we can speak something about the Professor Jeremy Siegel, but I really believe in humans, and that we will develop products, services that we will sell for people. So I really believe in the stock market. But what do you think about long run with the equity?
Well, absolutely. I would argue that retirees should have plenty of equities in their portfolio in addition to those safer assets that they could pull from if stocks enter some sort of a trough period. But I believe that equities, a globally diversified equity portfolio, should be part of everyone's portfolio. And the reason is the growth that you referenced, the ability to outrun inflation. So we know that equities are by no means a hedge against inflation risk. So if inflation's running high, equities aren't necessarily going to be up in that year. But we know that over time, equities are the asset class that has the best historical track record of beating inflation. So by all means, retirees should have ample equity exposure in their portfolio. One area where I differ with someone like J.L. Collins, though, is that I do think that globally diversified portfolio makes sense for all of us, where we aren't really placing bets on any one single market. We're not overly beholden to our home country, whether the US or Chile or somewhere else. We're basically saying, I'm agnostic on which of these markets will necessarily perform the best. I'm going to be diversified because there are wonderful companies throughout the world. And my thought on being globally diversified is that you're maintaining exposure to them.
And one additional question about that, about private markets. Do you think it's possible that private markets stole the return that the public market has had, like in the last 200 years? It's possible that the good companies um, doesn't go public, and not everybody could earn those returns?
We're definitely seeing a push to get smaller investors into private markets, whether equity or credit. And the the case is just that we are, at least here in the U.S., and I have to say I don't know about non-U.S. markets, but in the U.S., many companies are electing to stay private longer and not go public at all. And so the question is, like, does that total market index reflect the true opportunity set? And that's the case for having some exposure to private markets. When we look at long run return data, what we see is a slightly higher return advantage for private equities, U.S. private equities relative to public equities. But U.S. Public equities have been phenomenal, including during this period when fewer companies have been electing to go public. So I don't know that, there's an imminent case for investors to add privates to their portfolios. You certainly have some liquidity disadvantages with private equity. There's a transparency issue as well, where you can't see your returns on a daily basis. So I don't know that it's a must have. And then, the other big open question in my mind relates to access. That will smaller investors have access to the really juicy private equities that very large investors have availed themselves of? I'm not sure. So I don't know that at this point, retail smaller investors definitely need to carve out room in their portfolios for these securities.
It is definitely not the simple path to wealth. Maybe you can do it better, but you will have to do a lot of additional work in order to develop an allocation that puts really good private markets in it.
Absolutely. And the cost, which I didn't mention, but that's always something top of mind as well. The costs associated with whatever additional product that you might add to the portfolio. Is it really earning its keep on a risk adjusted basis? I'm not sure.
Talking about portfolios for people that are closer to retirement, and for our listeners, maybe their parents are this target audience. You talked about having a globally diversified portfolio, maybe not adding private investments. You talked about having some non-risky assets for when the markets go down. And I think this all comes together very well with the bucket strategy that I also heard is your go-to or your preferred strategy. What is it? Could you explain it to our audience?
Sure. And I always have to credit a financial planner who I know. Now he's largely retired, but he was also a professor of financial planning, Harold Avensky, and still has quite a large financial planning practice in the U.S. But I remember speaking with him probably 20 years ago, and this was an era when yields were very, very low in the U.S. And I was asking him, well, given that, and given that clients want income from their portfolios, how do you construct your client portfolios? And he said, well, it's really simple. I build a total return portfolio composed of stocks and probably some bonds, but I also bolt on this cash bucket. Accounting for 1 to 2 years worth of my clients' anticipated spending in retirement. And his point to me was that having those very liquid reserves gave his clients a ton of peace of mind with the long-term plan. In fact, they weren't bugging him at all about that long-term plan because they knew, that the markets would inevitably fluctuate, but they still had these liquid reserves. And that meant that they could go on with their plans, whatever constituted quality of life for them at that life stage. They could go out to dinner with their friends on Saturday night or plan to take their family on the cruise that they had planned next year, that the plans could go forward because those liquid reserves were in place. So that's the basic idea, that you're using your anticipated portfolio spending to guide how much to drop into each of these buckets. So 1 to 2 years worth of portfolio withdrawals in the very liquid, no risk portion of the portfolio. You don't want to overdo it because you have a bit of inflation risk with that portion of the portfolio because it's not earning that much. But then you're stepping out on the risk spectrum a little bit with another, say, 5 to 8 years worth of anticipated portfolio spending in high quality fixed income investments, combination of, I would say, short and intermediate term high quality bonds. And then with those two buckets, that cash bucket and the fixed income bucket, you've effectively built yourself a bulwark so that stocks could go down and stay down for, say, 7 to 10 years, and you would still have your spending set aside in relatively safe assets. So that's the basic idea of the bucket strategy. I feel like it resonates with actual human beings when they, hear about it. They're able to understand why they should asset allocate their portfolio in a given way, rather than saying, oh, you should be 55-45 or something like this. The starting point in this case is what do you need from this portfolio, and how can we set it up in place to help meet those cash flow needs?
I was reading some research about Professor Ana Maria Lusardi from Stanford, and she realized that only 30% of Americans could answer three simple questions, one of compounding interest, one of inflation, and one of diversification. And I really love your ideas, but people can't answer those kind of things. They won't be able to make a plan, as you said. If somebody of our audience is listening and don't know anything about this concept, but has a lot of really want to do this well, which is your advice in order to develop a plan, to start to make something about his or her finance?
So a couple of things. We've referenced a couple of books, or at least one book, J.L. Collins' book, Simple Path to Wealth, I think is a phenomenal starting resource. I also like to recommend Ramit Sethi's books. His last name is Sethi, and
Always a
he
big fan.
talks a lot about spending. I'm a huge fan of Ramit's because I feel like spending is the under-discussed component of all of this. And his point is that we need to be more mindful about our spending, and it's very easy to kind of get caught up in however people spend in your social circles or in your neighborhood, that you just sort of spend in line with them. You drive the same kind of cars they do, you wear the same kinds of clothes, and all those decisions that you make. But his point is, take a step back, think about what you personally value, and start making spending decisions based on your personal priorities. I feel like that is such an important point for young people, especially just getting off on the right foot. If they can be more mindful about their spending and decide what their priorities are, they're less likely to get caught up in, kind of Instagram type culture where they're just sort of mimicking what everyone around them is doing. So Ramit's books are excellent as well. Point I would make in terms of actually getting this plan up off the ground. One is just to make sure that whatever your life stage, whether you're retired or much younger in your journey, that you have liquid reserves set aside to meet those unanticipated expenses, which inevitably will occur, whether it's a big home repair, or auto repair, medical bill, or vet bill, just to make sure that you have a cushion there so that you're not having to resort to unattractive forms of financing to meet those needs. And then in terms of how much you are setting aside to save, I love the idea of automating those contributions, that you're setting up the transaction to happen monthly or even twice a month, where money is coming out of your bank and going into your investment accounts without you having to lift a finger. And investment providers will make it very easy for you to set up those automatic transactions. But I feel like it really takes a burden away from consumers in terms of helping them get the savings directed automatically, that you don't have the ability to override if the market gets bad. You're probably busy, you're probably not paying that much attention, and your money will just keep going in. And I would also say, as a side note, in our household, we haven't really had a budget for many years because we have our investment contributions automated. And so, however we spend our money, we don't stress out too much about it because we know that we're saving at a good level. And those funds are coming out of our account as we earn them, and they're going into our investment accounts. So I think that's a good practice. And I think it's one that translates pretty well globally as well.
Amazing. Sorry, Pablo. I know you want to ask something, but
I was going to
J.L.
say,
Collins,
Francisco has an automated deposit. How long ago? Like 10 years ago?
10 years ago, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it helps me a lot. But if you ask maybe J.L. Collins about the same question, he will tell you can do this alone. You don't need anybody to help you. What do you think about financial advisors in order to help people to develop this plan and implement this?
So I don't disagree with JL, especially for younger investors who are just getting their plans off the ground. For older adults, I have come to be a big believer in obtaining some kind of financial advice, and it needn't be the round the clock portfolio management that some people go for. It can be kind of one-time advice where you're paying for advice on kind of a per engagement basis or maybe on an hourly basis, but you're getting a second set of eyes on your plan. You're getting someone who can keep tabs on your investments. One thing we know with older adults is that unfortunately, the longer you live, the more likely you are to experience cognitive decline of some kind. And so for older adults, I see having some element of financial advice as a bit of a safety net for them, so that if they are unable to manage their finances or experience cognitive decline, that the advisor can step in and do that for them. So I happen to think that paying for some level of financial advice, especially later in life, can be money well spent, simply because there are so many moving parts to creating a retirement plan. And then another point I would make is that succession planning is important. I can't tell you how many times I speak to groups of older adults, usually men, where they are the sole decision maker. They're the sole household financial manager, and there's no safety net for him, maybe her, in case something happens. And so to me, that seems like a strong reason to consider some element of financial advice.
That's so interesting. We've been slowly moving more into the behavioral part. This podcast is called Financial Animals, so that's kind of like we love to discuss. And I would like to move the discussion of retirement into whatever is not financial, because we always talk about, okay, the 4% rule, glide paths, whatever, but it's so much more than that. What has been your takeaway doing all this research about what people really care about when they retire?
I realized as I was working on this book project that I had quite underrated the non-financial aspects of retirement. Like you, I was toiling on safe withdrawal rates and asset allocation for retirement. And those things are important. In fact, they're kind of table stakes when you think about a retirement plan. You need to have the baseline of financial wherewithal. But I do think many people show up in retirement without any sort of vision for what they will do with this time that they suddenly have on their hands. So I like the idea of kind of post age 50, people really being thoughtful about how they're spending their work time. If you can make some adjustments to the complexion of the work that you do so that it's more agreeable to you, that you like it more, you may be willing to do at least part of it longer. because we actually derive a lot from work that we probably don't give it credit for. And some people absolutely hate their jobs, and in which case the answer is get away from that job as soon as you possibly can. But others of us derive some sense of identity from our jobs, some sense of purpose, that we're mattering, that we're making a difference in the world. And we also have social relationships, social interactions with other people. When we step away from that work, we're often stepping away from those really positive attributes. So people need to be preemptive about replacing those things when they actually retire. So if the thought is that you'll take a hard stop from work in retirement, you need to do some work well prior to that retirement day to replace those connections, the sense of purpose, the sense of identity that you had from your job.
Can you give us a definition for you of wealthy when you get to your 50s, to your 60s? It's only about money?
Absolutely not. No. I think wealth, we should define it in a lot of different ways. So there's social wealth, there's our connection to the world around us and the people we love. Certainly, financial wealth is a component of it, but wealth, in terms of our inner lives, in the sense that we matter to the world and that people care what we're doing. All of those things, I think, figure into wealth. And that's the really crazy thing, is that we all know people with a lot of financial wealth who lack the other types of wealth, and then people with very little financial wealth who are wealthy in other important regards. In fact, when we look on the data about happiness in retirement, generally speaking, people are pretty happy regardless of their level of financial wherewithal. And it might be that they are just able to pursue things that they didn't have time to pursue while they were working. So I think that's an encouraging message, even for people who have fairly modest means, that if you can find ways to spend your time in a way that's enriching, if you can find ways to maintain social relationships, even if you don't have a lot of wealth, you still have a pretty good shot at remaining happy in your later years.
I think there's a very close similarity. When we started the podcast, we started talking about all financial related things. And at some point, maybe on episode 30, this will be probably like 160, the one that we publish. On episode 30 with Francisco, we were like, what are we going to talk about? Like, what else is there to talk about? And then we started to veer more towards, how do you spend your time? Do you have time wealth? Do you have a healthy body? How is your energy levels? Do you have a sense of purpose? And I feel like with the retirement, it's kind of like the same problem, just in a later stage in life. The financial part, there's frameworks. It's a hard problem, maybe the hardest problem, but it's kind of solvable. But there are other things that you need to continuously work on.
No, absolutely. And you're making me think about Sahil Bloom's book. I don't know if you two have
Yeah.
read his book, The 5 Types of Wealth. That book, I thought, was such a wonderful exploration of how we can find ourselves rich in some areas and poor in others. So I went through the book and realized I'm quite time impoverished. And it's something that I want to try to do better at. But I love that book, and I love to recommend it for people because it hits on all of those types of wealth, and physical wealth is certainly a big part of the book, about how to, make sure that you're taking care of your body, because nothing else really matters if you don't have that physical health.
Which of those 5 types of wealth has the biggest rate of return for you?
For me personally, probably the social wealth. I realize just how much I, love being connected to my family and my community and my colleagues. In fact, I mentioned to you both that I'm a full-time remote worker now, mainly because my work is pretty solitary a lot of the time. But my favorite work days are the ones where I get to be in the office with my colleagues. I usually don't plan to actually get anything done on those days because I'm so busy visiting with people and catching up and that's just such a valuable component of my work days. So yeah, that's probably the one that has the consistently highest ROI for me.
It's really interesting because the the problem with your finance, as Pablo said, you can solve it. You can make a plan and you can stick with it with a lot of time. But the thing about your relations, your energy, your body, is a problem that you will never will solve. You will have
Mhm.
to care about them all the time, and you have to do the work in the investment world, like the stocks or the bonds. Do the hard work. You only have to not spend everything you earn. But I think that a really interesting point is that you have to really take these finance things uh, really in your mind, and resolve that problem in order to don't take care of it for a lot of time, because you have to give your time to these other really important things.
Yeah, that's such an important point. In a way, I think there's sort of a reassuring sense of control that comes with those things. That with the market, we know that it's out of our hands, right? We can assume that market returns will generally be X over long periods of time. With the other stuff, I mean, I suppose if there's a reassuring message, it's that these things fall squarely within our control, that the decision to get up and exercise in the morning, or to reach out to friends and kind of put yourself out there, those things all fall within our control to a great extent. So to me, it's kind of an empowering message.
Another maybe empowering message or exercise that, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's Jordan Grumet or
Mm.
Gramet. He talked about a life review, like going through the biggest events of your life and seeing what gave you the most maybe purpose or were more impactful. Did you do the exercise?
I have done some of these exercises, and they're available online. People can Google life review. This is oftentimes something that's conducted with people at the very end of their lives. So Jordan is what's called a hospice doctor here in the US, meaning that he works with patients at the very end of their lives. And they're helping the patients holistically. So they're helping make sure that they're physically comfortable, but these are people who have some terminal diagnosis and not usually very long to live, but they're making sure that they're physically comfortable, but they're also making sure that they are reflecting on their lives. There's sort of a spiritual counselor component to this. And in the book, Jordan talks about doing these life reviews and not waiting until the very last moment as he does with his patients, but to be preemptive. And as you embark on retirement or whatever life stage, to reflect on what have been your major achievements in your life. What are the things you wished you had done differently? And is there still time to address those things that you might regret at the very end of your life? I wanted to include Jordan as the last chapter of the book because it sounds so depressing, but in reality, I find his messaging to be incredibly uplifting. And his point is, don't wait. Use this life stage to make the rest of your life whatever you want it to be, and think forward and preemptively address regrets that you might end up having at the end of your life. And a key point Jordan makes, and he's written a couple of books that I would recommend, but his point is, what people tend to really regret is the stuff they didn't try, the things that that they just were too worried about or scared about to try. So to actually don't wait to jump on those tasks. He gives an example about a young man who was dying of cancer, one of his patients, and the young man, I believe, had tried to summit Mount Everest and had failed, hadn't made it to the top, but yet loved to regale everyone with stories about this journey. And so Jordan's point was he didn't make it to the top, but he still was really glad that he dropped what had been quite a lucrative career to pursue this goal. And most of us don't, intend to summit Mount Everest, but we've probably got other things on our list that we want to get done during our lives. And the point is to give it a college try rather than have regrets at the end.
That's one of the reasons that with Pablo have a challenge that we stop to drinking alcohol for a month and let's see what it happens. You have to try things. And yesterday I was having a conversation with a friend of these kind of topics that you should try it. And then you don't know what will happen. But I don't want to get to my 80s and have that question in my mind. What happened? What will happen if I stop drinking alcohol, if I do more sport or those kind of things? And regarding to those learnings that you get in your book, what surprises or aha moments did you get from writing the book?
At first, I have to ask, how did the no alcohol challenge go?
Really
We're on
good.
it still. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feeling good?
One day in. No, just kidding.
One day. Okay. I'll check
we're
back
almost
with
a month
you.
through.
All
No,
right.
We're almost done.
All right. Well done. So in terms of surprises, I think one is how many people, even financial people, mentioned the importance of social interactions. It's a through line in the book. Even when I wasn't asking about social interactions, people seem to bring it up. Because a lot of the retirement research really does point to the value of those social interactions. Laura Carstensen, who's a researcher at Stanford, was the main person I interviewed on this topic. And one point she makes is that our social networks do tend to winnow down a little bit as we age. And some of that is for sad reasons that people move away or die and they fall out of our social orbit. But some of that is self-selection, that as we move into our later years of our lives, we're simply being more thoughtful about who we want to spend time with. We're being a little bit more careful about who we spend time with. And we are self-selecting into those relationships that are just more gratifying to us. And so I think the example she gives is your parents may have been perfectly great people to spend time with on the side of the soccer field or whatever the case might be. But as you move further along in your life, you shed some of those peripheral relationships. You're not just busy all the time with social interactions that maybe don't light you up as much. So I think that's an important and reassuring point, that if you find your social network winnowing down a little bit, don't sweat it too much. That's probably some natural attrition going on there in your friends group, but also be looking for making sure that your social network doesn't get too small. So you don't want to be stuck with just one or two close friends. You would ideally have a slightly larger network than that. And you also want to diversify along age bands. And that's one reason why I get nervous when I hear about these communities of people who are all the same age, retirement communities, because my worry is that some people, even though those communities can have really wonderful amenities to age into, that you're just not getting exposed to new ideas. You are kind of sticking with people who are too much like you, and that's not good for us either. So that's another point I would make about the whole social interaction.
That's a great point. Always I think our boss Fernando was saying, like, he would just want to keep working because he wants to be with younger people and get the ideas.
Exactly. And, people with kids, grandkids, whatever the case might be, that naturally puts you in connection with younger people on a regular basis. That's really good for people in general. But if you can expand that network to include younger people at different parts of your life, to me, that seems super valuable as well.
I can't let you go without asking this question. We love books. We loved your book. I like how Tim Ferriss asks this question. What books have you gifted the most in your life?
Oh gosh. I love fiction. So I read a lot of modern fiction. Dave Eggers' book, Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, is one of my favorite books. I also love a book called Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. So I find myself reading a lot of fiction. Those are probably the most frequently but gifted books from me. Yeah, fiction is just something I do as an antidote to my work to get me thinking about people and how people think about the world.
And talking about books, we
That's
are
beautiful.
writing a book. We only have the title, but we will we'll develop it. The name of the book will be Financial Minimalism, and it's because we really think that you have to develop a philosophy about the money, the way you spend it, the way you invest it. Will
I love it.
be
I'd be all over that book.
amazing. We will send it to you. But what do you think about? What will be your best advice related to the philosophy that we should develop around money?
Well, I would say it gets back to being deliberate about what your values are, rather than just letting yourself get caught up in the flow of how people are doing things around you. I mentioned Ramit Sethi's books, but really developing a sense of this is what I value, this is what I want to do in this world. And then your spending priorities and in turn your savings can fall into place. But without that, it just seems like sort of amorphous wealth accumulation. So you want to connect what you're doing with your money to your goals. So I think it starts with some introspection. It starts with uncovering what you personally value. To me, that's the starting point. And like you, I'm a minimalist. I often joke that the financial services industry is the financial complexity complex because it seems to really revel in creating a lot of overly complicated, overwrought products that people at the end of the day don't really need. So I am fully on board with the idea of kind of fighting back against that idea.
And one last question for one last piece of advice, maybe related to what we just were talking about, maybe not. But what do you recommend our audience to either start doing or stop doing?
So start doing is automate your savings. It is such a freeing step to take where you're not having discretion over how much you save. And maybe you start small and then edge up that that savings amount. In terms of stop doing, I actually have a stop doing list on my desk because I think it's super important to be mindful of the things that we don't enjoy for whatever reason, but we may find ourselves on the hook to accomplish. And, some of these things you can't fully get away from, but if you can take stock of the things that when you think about them, whether they're in your work life or your personal life, things that you don't enjoy, and you can try to find a way away from them, to me, that's such a valuable exercise where you're mastering the art of subtraction in your life. So I would urge everyone to get a stop doing list. And this is not my invention. It's someone else's, and I forget the specific author, but I found it to be just a really valuable centering mechanism when I think about how to direct my activities.
Could we ask a couple of things that are on your list?
So what I find when I look at the things on my list, a lot of them are things that maybe confer a sense of prestige, like, oh, I should do that. I should go to this conference or something because it's a big, important conference. It's important to be seen there. It's things like that I tend, unless there's, some thing that I'm going to be talking about that I'm really engaged with, or I'm going to see some certain people who I really know that I like to spend time with, stepping away from those kind of prestigious things that don't necessarily confer joy. I would say that's a unifying theme among some of the things on my stop doing list.
It should be like a really big topic. The fact that you have to run with your ego.
Ego is the enemy. Right?
Ego
I
is
think
the
so.
enemy.
It can be.
That's great. Well, Christine, thank you so much for taking the time having this conversation. We will be revisiting it a lot of times, I think, in the future. I hope the audience also like what we talked about. And where can people reach you, read your thoughts, your research?
Well, thank you both. It's been my great pleasure. People can find me on morningstar.com, which is our uh, website. There are Morningstars all over the world. So morningstar.com is our US website, but there are mini Morningstars all over the place where we're doing investment research, all objective. So there people can find my articles and videos. And then my book is called How to Retire. And that is, it's been a labor of love, but it's super exciting to see it's done really well and seems to be showing up on a lot of people's bookshelves. So those are my two main projects. And then my podcast that I do is called The Long View, which I co-host with a couple of my colleagues.
Such an
Ours-
amazing inspiration, your podcast.
It's our
Thank you very
second
much
most
about it.
favorite podcast.
Oh, thank you.
After
What's your
ours.
first?
Ours.
All right.
I'm
Good
just
answer.
kidding, but we like it a lot. We listen to it and it gives us very good insights. So
That's awesome.
Once again,
Thank you,
Christine, and we hope you have a very relaxing weekend.
Thank you. You too. Great talking to you both.
Mensajito para los que se quedan al final. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Y la mitad de las personas escucharon en español, la mitad en inglés, el capítulo de Nick. Buen dato freak para los que les gusta la información.
Buen dato a seguir. Ojalá que cada vez más puedan escuchar en inglés, que es parte de lo que queremos potenciar de nuestro capital humano. Al final, tú, Pablo, con lo bueno que estáis para el inglés, siempre lo he sido, pero ahora seguramente estáis mejor. Estáis pudiendo
thank you.
consumir mucho mejor contenido.
Me fluye más.
O leyendo los libros más rápido. Te ayuda a sacarle punta al lápiz para poder optimizar los tiempos y tener más time wealth, como diría Sahil Bloom.
Sahil Bloom. Sí.
Oye,
Sí, yo creo que pienso menos. Antes tenía que traducir cada vez que leía en inglés en mi cerebro y ahora simplemente pasa de una.
pasa. Yo estoy mucho más atrás, pero me pasa con palabras en inglés que como que me cuesta traducir porque las escucho en la oficina nomás. Pero fuera de eso, si se quedaron hasta acá, vamos a partir de nuevo el mes salvaje, que ha sido una absoluta locura. Yo creo que es el camino que deberíamos seguir, ok. Tener una comunidad abierta, recomendaciones, está funcionando bien, la gente está respetando creo que los canales súper bien, pero la mayoría se está perdiendo el mejor grupo de todos, el que está transformando, y hay un poquito íntimo, pero sin dar nombre. O sea, un testimonio de dejé el copete, me está cambiando la vida y esto es lo mejor que podría haber hecho en la vida. Otro no está sin redes sociales. O sea, yo no estoy tomando, Pablito, estoy con 15 minutos máximo en redes sociales y es cuando más he podido leer en mi vida, creo. Es un grupo de transformación y el que no esté ahí se está perdiendo algo total.
La vida en base a experimentos. Para allá vamos.
Seguirá, ¿no?
Tenemos que ver cómo o repetir, o aumentar, o cambiar. Pero sí, algo se hace.
Me parece que estas cosas que uno hace un mes, 2 meses, algo te quedan para siempre. Igual me quiero tomar mis vinitos de repente, ahí me siento un poco restringido, pero como para amigos, pero creo que voy a quedar muy chipeado a no tomes por tomar y trata de controlarlo. Pero sí me gustaría hacer otro desafío. Por ejemplo, solamente puedo tomar vino si cociné. Y si cociné me gané una copa para el fin de semana con los amigos. Y porque quiero cocinar mejor, también me quiero alimentar mejor. Entonces ir variando y que algunos de estos como que se quedan en tu ADN, creo que es como la clave.
Sí. A mí me pasó. Yo el mes animal no hice nada relacionado al alcohol. Ya tuvimos nuestros 30 días y me tomo de repente mi cervecita, de repente mi copa de vino, pero mucho menos que antes. Y en situaciones más elegidas por pinza, porque me acuerdo de ese mes entero sin tomar y lo bien que me sentí como de energía, lo parejito que me sentí. Y decía así, hay un precio que estoy pagando por este beneficio de corto plazo. Y aquí lo vi, un experimento de un mes no es nada, vuela.
O sea, si uno lo ve en este calendario, creo que se lo vi al Five Types of Wealth, que te pone el calendario de tu vida en semanas. Y
Sí, porque es el
al
clásico de Tim Urban, Your Life in Weeks.
final, si lo pintáis con un experimento de un mes, como decís, ¿cómo no voy a hacer esto en mi vida? Tengo que ser demasiado pago para... O, o- o algo en mi cerebro no está funcionando bien, ¿cómo no me va a poder controlar un mes? Creo que es tremendo punto de partida para hacer esos cambios que uno realmente sabe que son los correctos, que debería hacer, que te van a hacer mejorar, que van a hacer tu vida más fácil y que la inercia te tiene atrapado. Pero salir acompañado es mucho mejor. Así que súbense al mes salvaje.